Thank you. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Jamie Scott. Jamie farms 2,000 acres of corn, soybeans, and wheat as part of a family operation in northwest Indiana. The Scott operation was an early adopter of conservation tillage and is now at 100% of all those acres, planting no-till conservation cropping system that incorporates cover crops every winter. After sharing his experiences with neighbors and helping them establish their own cover crops, Jamie started Scott's Cover Crops, a business today that serves nearly 400 other farmers, provides seed for around 100,000 acres, and aerially seeds more than 50,000 acres. The Scott family operation has been recognized with several regional and national conservation awards. Jamie is the chairman of the Cosico, and I probably really wrecked that, County Soil and Water Conservation District, and currently serves as vice president of the Indiana Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. Please join me in a warm welcome for Jamie Scott.
Thank you, and good morning. First of all, this is my most important slide. It is a family farm. It is not just myself that farms. This is my family, my parents, Jim and Kathy. As my dad says, someone has to stay home and work while I'm out traveling and speaking all the time. So this is actually the workforce in the springtime. You can take the guy off of this side for most of the winter. So again, I want to give them credit. Everything that's done, it is basically ideas of both of us sharing. At times it's been one fighting the other and evolving through this process. This is the second most important slide that I have, and so what I'm going to talk about today is things that we do on our farm, things that I've been involved with. I tell people at times the concept may be the same, but the prescription may change as we travel to different areas. So things that I say doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be all used here. Keep in mind the red dot is where I am from. We have lake effect snow. We have some things that help us out, temperatures, different things that may or may not all relate back to this area as I speak. Farm background, we've been long-term no-till. We're 100% no-till, 100% cover crops on the farm. We've been no-till since the early 80s. We've been 100% cover crops for the last 12 to 15 years. As far as tile drainage goes, I know driving in here, I saw there were some areas that looked like heavier soils. We're down to 30 acres on our farm that's not pattern drained. When I say pattern drained, I mean anywhere from 160-foot centers down to, we have some as close as 30-foot. So we've got rid of the excess moisture. That allows us to do some things when it comes to no-till to cover crops that I think are important. I'm going to talk about tile a little bit later, maybe being excessive, but we've got some there to take care of the excess moisture. Crop rotations, for the most part, were corn, beans, and wheat. We also have some alfalfa hay on our farm. We have a little more roll to the ground than some of it here locally that I've seen. So we've planted that to trees or put hay on there. It's just not suitable for crops all the time. And then I put previous two owners down there. What I want to do is remind myself to tell you a couple of stories. And as far as farm background goes and to reference when I go into some of the things I'm doing, the questions last night were asked, why do you guys do this stuff? And we were very fortunate to have two previous owners that we now own the farm that helped us understand some things. The first one is this set of buildings right here. He had 80 acres, and I don't know if any of you have heard the story that Jill Clapperton tells about finding buckwheat and the benefits of it, but this is the farm that we were on when that happened, and the effects of that were 30 years after the use of buckwheat. So luckily we were around that guy. He had great diversity, great crop rotation, some things that we still see the benefits today from that. We also had another farm that the guy would stop every spring, and not that he would slap us across the face, but that's kind of what he was trying to do. We had a corn bean rotation. We were no-tilling. We thought we were doing great things. He was trying to tell us that we were tearing his farm apart that we bought, that we ought to take care of it. When we introduced cover crops back into the system, he said, I think you're on to something. Now that he sees the cocktail mixes that we've used, he really thinks we're on to something. So those two landowners have helped us along the way understand soil health and what's going on, even though it wasn't maybe always called soil health. In June, RP and looked like that one 6 years ago. It only took 6 years to go from the good field with modern farming practices to compact the soil, to decrease the infiltration, and really tear this farm up. So it's something that we have to do long term, stay with the system to get those benefits. On our farm, to get those benefits without leaving it lay for 20 some years. I mean, again, we still have to have profit, we still have to farm, so we're not going to do that. The best thing we saw was to add cover crops to our system. The main way we're doing it is we're flying on cover crops. We're in an area we have airplanes. We don't have windmills like I saw when I crossed the border. So it's a lot easier to get airplanes in there and do things. What I'm going to talk about later is it's really about timing. I'm not a fan of this airplane. It's that I'm a fan of the timing of getting that cover crop out there and the benefits from it. But we went at, I don't know what year, 10 years ago basically, we started using airplanes to cover acres and getting the cover crop out there so that when we harvest the field, we already have something out there living. It's holding the soil, taking up nutrients, taking out compaction, gives us some footing to work on in the fall. There's some roll to the ground with that cover on there. That soil is not moving. We've kept everything in place and getting really good benefits out of that. Just a picture of us going in and drilling beans then. There were some questions last night about killing it, when we kill it, whatever. But, the longer we get into the system, the more we're doing things that would have scared us 5-10 years ago. We're planting into stuff green, coming back and terminating it, later, not worrying about it. So just a picture of that. Soybeans the same way. Anything that doesn't go to wheat, definitely want to cover crop on. One of those first two landowners that I talked about, that was one of his goals, is that there was never a bean field left uncovered on his farm. And so that's something we went back to doing. Gives us great footing to work off of when we're out there harvesting. Again, we have something in place, and pretty much every acre is green in the fall on our farm. No-tilling into it, very simple. This is just happens to be a bean field that we've no-tilled corn back into. No row cleaners on our planter. I'll discuss that a little bit later. Very simple. We just don't want to disturb any soil if we don't have to. Even corn back to corn, we messed with that for a few years. Not a big fan of that. We want more diversity and rotation than that. But I hear guys out there say, well, we can't do this. It has been done on our farm. We've been able to make it work. It's just tweaking a few things to get that done. I wanted to put up here caution. This is the only two pictures I'm going to show of bare soil. This is the only time that we see bare soils when we dig these root pits. And I wanted to show everyone the soil. Again, as I'm driving to different areas, I see where there's a lot of differences. Had breakfast with a gentleman this morning, and he was talking about 6 inches of topsoil, and that's pretty close to our area. It's not deep topsoil like Illinois and Iowa. In this picture here, there's close to 10 inches to a foot of topsoil there. But you can see, the channels where we're continuing to use the same root channels, the cover crop roots, the cash crop roots, the earthworms, everything's, using those same channels. And we're changing that soil down through the profile, getting some deep root channels. In a drought year and a monsoon year, these help us. I've seen ryegrass roots. I've got pictures on my phone where they went 9.5 foot deep in one winter. If that cash crop root can follow that 9.5-foot deep channel, it has access to a lot of moisture, to a lot of nutrients, a lot of things there. In a drought year like 2012, we saw 20 bushel yield gain in corn from the first year use of cover crops. So that's pretty big. When we had $8 corn in 2012 times the 20 bushel, that more than pays for cover crops for a few years. This spot right here not quite being as tall, and he thought I was being a little bit picky compared to the neighbors again. But so again, the system works. We have a lot of trust in it now after 2012, after 2015. Not just looking at the cost of that cover crop, not the cost of the system, but the benefits of that system that will help pay for it. So it was said that we fly on 50,000 acres of cover crop, so because of all those benefits, we have turned it into kind of a side business that I wish I didn't have most days. It takes way too much time away. But we are flying on about 50,000 to 60,000 acres of cover crops a year with airplanes. Our biggest day has been 7,000 acres that we've got covered so far. So we can get a lot of acres covered in the Midwest and pretty quick. There's about 100,000 acres of cover crops attached to my cell phone that we work with. So the best thing with that is we go all the way from the thumb of Michigan to southern Indiana. We have a lot of tests, a lot of trials. That's the one thing we've gained out of this. But I was talking to the gentleman at breakfast, and I said, unfortunately, everyone brands me a fan of these airplanes, and they think that I say that's the only way to apply cover crops. Really what I'm getting at is it's the timing and something that I think we really need to take a look at. And so what this slide is a picture of two of our fields. The line down the middle represents a road. It's the only thing that splits these two. This picture was taken in late December one year, and the reason we took this picture was we had a 2-inch rain. And I have never seen annual ryegrass at any time wash once it's this tall. But yet that year with 2 inches of rain, we saw some soil erosion in some of the customers' fields and things that we were working with. So of course we went out and had to dig root pits and see what was going on. The reason I'm a fan of the airplane is this side over here, if you would have drove by at 55 mile per hour or something in your pickup truck, you would have said that the left side of the screen is a better cover crop than the right side. So about everyone judges it that way. The right side was flown on. There's a few bare spots throughout. It looks a little thin. It's not as even. Everyone says that's a problem. The plane did a bad job or something's going on. When we walked across the field, the side on the left that was drilled that looked better, we could hardly walk across that soil. When we got over here to the side that had been flown on, we could have drove a semi across that field after the 2-inch rain. So even though we were a fan of cover crops, we were a fan of getting it on early, we missed the point in this, and so that's why I share it with everyone else. When we started digging under the ground, this is what we saw. Again, the left side of the screen is drilled, the right side is flown on. This is why the left side of the screen had tried to erode. It didn't have the root growth. It's why we could hardly walk across it and we were building up mud on our boots. And it's why the right side we could have drove a semi across, is because there was more root growth on where we had flown it on versus where we had drilled. The reason for that is, for us to wait and drill, the crop has to be off of that field. So basically a month's time of waiting for that crop to come off at the best of when we could have flown it on. So what I did is I went back one night, I couldn't sleep, trying to figure out, why there's so much difference in root growth, because again, on top of the ground, everyone would have judged the drilled on field as a better field of cover crops. So I looked at the average fly-on date of September the 7th in my area, and then just picked 1 month later of maybe going to try to drill it. And what I found is by having to wait that month's time, we lost an hour and a half of sunlight and 12 degrees temperature. And that's why we had more root growth, we have more benefits of getting it on early. So it's not that I'm a fan of the airplane, it's a fan of that's the best way I found to put it on early. So this was a very helpful slide this spring when we were wet a little bit and then turned off cold, and we were waiting to plant. It was the last day of April, which planters would have been going in the field. Yet the only reason that they weren't going was soil temperature was 42 degrees. So I'm at a field day and I said, listen, 12 degrees is very important in the springtime. We're not planting cash crop. Why is it not important in the fall on the cover crop? And so it's something I think we need to think about. We can use more species, we can get more root growth, more benefits out of cover crops if we can get them started early. And that's why we've went, to the airplane and become a fan of that. Now, even though we were no-tilling, even though we were using ryegrass and some crimson clover, rapeseed and things is our cover crop, and we thought we were doing great things, going back to those two farmers that had told us diversity and rotation are key, we were looking at other options. So we put wheat back into our system. We now have corn, beans, and wheat. And then between all the cover crops, we have a cocktail mix that we're using, I'm going to talk about now, that we have 20-some different species, 20-some different roots that are hitting our farm in a 3-year rotation now. So we're back to farming like those two guys were trying to tell us to do with the way they were farming, and we're seeing why they did that. We know that everyone in the neighborhood thought those two farmers were crazy, so we now know what everyone thinks of us. Now we know why they didn't worry about why everyone thought they were crazy, is because we see the benefits of this system. So this is one of the cocktail mixes we're using. Last year we were up to, 19 different species in there that we were trying. So I don't know that it's real important that you write all these down. The reason I show this slide is because of the cost of that first year in the bottom right-hand corner. And it was $54 an acre for us to seed this mix, to get some of the things like Phacelia, sun hemp, and different things to us. It was tough at that time. There wasn't as many people using them. So this cost has come down. Last year, like I said, we used about 19 different things, and the cost was $30-some an acre. So it's come down the more of us that are using these seeds. But the story behind this one is, again, it's a family operation. My dad and myself sat down most mornings when I'm home and go through a lot of decisions. And I came to the shop one morning and he said, "What have you been working on?" I said, I think I got the cocktail mix all figured out. Well, of course, you know what the first question was he asked, right? How much does it cost? I said, well, let's talk about the benefits and what I think we're going to get out of this thing first. Nope. We're worried about the cost. So I tell people when I travel that the cost of this almost got me fired from the farm. That my dad thought that at that point in time it was best I find another job, that profit has to come into play, and that I really don't understand, and he didn't want the farm being wasted away and go broke. So I sat down and I said, what if we produce this amount of pounds of nitrogen? What if we gain this out of it? What if we can gain this, many bushel of corn, this many bushel of beans over the next few years? And we had, 400 acres of wheat that year, and I convinced him enough that I got 100 acres of wheat to do this cocktail mix on. So anyone that's been to our farm in the last few years now understands that all wheat acres are to this cocktail mix, and that my dad can't talk enough about how good it was, and luckily convinced him, even though of this $54 an acre cost, that there are benefits to it. So that's the reason for this slide. Don't just focus on that cost, focus on the benefits as well. Again, to get diversity, to get rotation in our farm without leaving the farm lay 20-some years to get those benefits, we went to this diverse cocktail mix. We are putting this through the main box of a grain drill. It is staying mixed, no problem. It's a very simple system. This is a picture of it early on. It's very fast growing. It takes off and outcompetes the volunteer wheat, some of the things that are there. This is, later in the season, sunflowers coming on. This mix is designed to have pollinators, a lot of different things in it to have benefits on the farm. Later on in the growing season, this is getting towards fall, and this is normally when I start getting phone calls from people that I've convinced that they ought to use this cocktail mix. They now say, what are we going to do with this mess? Do we moldboard it down? Do we bush hog it off? Are we going to burn this? What are we going to do with all this residue? So my answer is always just be patient, which I can tell never goes over very well with them. But I tell them just, bear with me a minute, wait till next spring, you'll see what I'm talking about, just let it go. So wintertime, again, we have some snowfall, lake effect snow on occasion. You can see it's holding that. Again, a lot less material. It's starting to break down. There's still some material there to keep stuff up so we don't form a mat on the ground and get too cold or too wet in the spring. And then planting time, normally those phone calls quit coming in. They see that it's very easy to deal with. Again, just no-tilling into it, direct seeding, trying not to disturb anything if at all possible. We do have guidance, which is nice. We got the marker down here to do some stuff, but the guidance does make it nicer to plant straight through this at times. Corn coming up through there. Again, this is pretty early. This was from this year, having starting that 30-inch rain spell in June. Side dress time of it, and then a little bit later in the season. And again, the best field of corn in our neighborhood was that field that had been rested 20 some years. The second best corn in the neighborhood was anything that had this cocktail mix after it. I had people from outside the area come in and look at stuff. We had a neighbor that took an alfalfa field out of production, and we were beating him with this cocktail mix. My notes and my data show that I can produce as much nitrogen with this cocktail mix as I could with a pure stand of hairy vetch. So a lot of anywhere, and it was due to beetle counts and some things. But that guy, at the end of the season, would leave one field lay. So he'd plant all his crops, and when they were done, he'd go seed that field of buckwheat, let it grow up, and then hire my dad to come in and roll it down with a disc. And he said, I don't want to see soil, I just want you to roll it down, and it was reseeding itself. So it got 2 crops of buckwheat in that year. And he left the field lay, that diversity, that rotation. And so 30 years later, the benefits were still there from that buckwheat. So as you saw in the cocktail mix, there's buckwheat in the cocktail mix.
Excellent. What challenges do you face when harvesting soys that have a cover crop growing in them? And what species are you seeding into the soys?
So when we looked at cover crops in our farm, our challenge throughout all the years were after soybeans. How do we get that seeded? And by putting wheat back into the rotation, we eliminated some of those problems because wheat will follow those soybean crop, So we took a lot of our acres out. The other acres are getting annual ryegrass, crimson clover, or rapeseed, depending on the price and the year and what the next crop's going to be in there. But basically, we're blowing those acres on with the airplane to annual ryegrass as our main crop, our cover crop, when it's not the cocktail mix or when it's not wheat.
If interseeding cover don't benefit the current growing crop, what benefits will there be for the next growing season?
Right, and that's a really good question because that's where the guys in Quebec that I work really close with, we tried to convince them, so year 1, if there's 0 difference, what's year 2? And so we've had very little data on that. And that's something I forgot to mention with even our cocktail mix. I told you we had 40 bushel yield gain in corn that year, but we had a 5 bushel yield gain from soybeans the next year. So again, when I tell you buckwheat lasted 30 years, there's definitely advantages to those cover crops throughout. So I don't know what that number is on interseeding in our area yet, but that's a good point, that it's not just this year. And we no longer look at things as a 1-year deal. We look at them in 5 or 10-year lots to what's the gain at the end of 5 years or at the end of 10 years is the way to evaluate some of that stuff. So don't really know the answer to that question in our area, but that is a good point to make.
Okay. Do you have any issues with cover crops becoming a weed problem? Have you experienced that?
We have not. One of those in our area that everyone hates is buckwheat. They say that's a weed because it's in our cocktail mix. It's viable seed. It's going to be there the next spring. But by us going to corn, our corn chemical, any residual is going to take that out for us. So not really, but it's us changing our management style, changing our practices to adapt to those kinds of things. I know the annual ryegrass is maybe where that question comes from. Everyone's scared of that product. We've used it 12 years. And again, of our 100,000 acres of cover crops that's attached to my phone, I'd say 99% of them is ryegrass. We have not seen a problem with it. I've even tried to screw it up at times and make it a problem just in case someone does, so I can help solve it. And I can't even get it to be a problem on our farm. So.
Okay, there's a last question here. What type of planter modifications have you done, if any, or adjustments to your planter?
And our planter is pretty simple. There's nothing special to it. We don't have different gauge wheels. We don't have different closing wheels. We don't pull drag chains. I tell people this, that our goal is to get that seed at a consistent depth and get it covered, and that's our goal. So there are days that we may not plant all day. There's days that we say, listen, we can't get it at the consistent depth or we can't get it closed. We may set those days. The one advantage to our system is when we build soil health, when we build that soil up like we want it, we have more days to work. My biggest problem in the springtime is I sometimes have to hide the tractor keys from my dad because when it's behind that cocktail mix, it's about ready to plant anytime. So, he just wants to go out there and plant. But we have a much longer window. We can wait that half a day. We can wait that hour until something's right because our plant's going to grow faster, it's going to grow healthier, it's going to catch if we did it wrong.
Excellent. When I came up here, I think you mentioned there was another comment you might want to make before the questions. I'll give you, we got a couple minutes if you want to do that now.
Well, and so on that of having the soil right in making improvements and catching up. So this is a good friend of mine. He's from Southwest Michigan. He has specialty crops, and so we work with him on the cocktail mix. And so I want to give him credit and tell his story a little bit. But he made me think a couple times this year. You know, the first one was when I went up to his place this summer to drop off the cocktail mix, he was kind of laughing. He said, Outfit came in this week, and he has an orchard, and he said, they tried to get me to spray my orchard for bugs. And I said, what'd you do? He says, what do you think I did? I said, well, I would assume that you didn't spray for bugs. He said, that's right. He said, you know what? I had one apple that had worms in it. And he said, they tried to convince me to spray my whole orchard because I had worms in one apple. So he said, I asked him, if I sprayed the worms and killed them out of that apple, were you going to buy it? And they said, no, it's a bad apple. And he said, exactly. So why kill all my butterflies, all my, bees, all my ladybugs, everything beneficial to go after the one apple because it was a bad apple? And it was a bad apple, whether it had worms in it or not. That's why they went to it. And it's back to the same thing of that finch row scenario. It not only works on my farm, it worked on his farm in the orchard. When it's a healthy crop, the bugs don't seem to get in it. The disease doesn't seem to get in it. And George had figured that out. He's saying, I was going to kill the next 2 or 3 crops because I didn't have the beneficials there if I would have went after that one apple that they were concerned about. So it's a very good point. We do that a lot in agriculture. We walk 2 feet in the field and see that we have some bug, and we instantly go back and get a jug and spray the whole field and kill beneficials and kill other things that we're interested in. The other thing is, George is using our cocktail mix and sees the benefits of it. And when we talk about having that field right and going to plant it and get a good crop, it's going to grow faster, it's going to grow healthier. George is so in tune with that theory that he married one of 5 daughters. His father-in-law owned the farm. George bought it all. It's the only daughter that anyone was interested in farming. George is now farming 75% of the farm. He still owns 100% of it, but he's only farming 75%. And he told me, he said, I'm taking more income off of 75% of the farm than I was 100%. And it's because he's resting the 25%. He's doing things like, he may be raising cereal rye and vetch in there for part of the season to seed on his other acres, or he's planting the cocktail mix, and he's resting that soil. This is one of the fields that he rents out to a guy. He's never, ever had under 200 bushel corn, and he charges the guy $75 an acre cash rent for corn that year. He does not raise corn. He just wants it in the rotation for diversity. And, I told him when the guy gets done farming or the bank account gets full, I'll go ahead and cash rent it for $75 an acre and get over 200 bushel corn every time. But again, he's saying that I took the 100% of the acres that I own and I'm only farming 75% of them and making more income than I was when I was farming the 100%. And so by us putting wheat in the rotation, everyone says, well, wheat's not a high cash crop, or why are you doing that? In a sense, we're doing the exact same thing that George is doing. We just don't look at it that way. So we're resting those acres, we're getting gain out of them by when we plant our cash crop, that field is right. And he told me, he said, you're going to put the same input cost in that field no matter when you plant it. If that's $100, $500, whatever that input cost is, why not when you plant it have the ability to get half again as much yield or twice as much yield? You're going to have a better profitability statement, and that's a good point. So,
great. Thank you very much. Excellent timing here. We're just done right now. So thanks, Jamie. Let's show our appreciation. We're just